They wore immaculate tuxedos and quoted Shakespeare. But behind the scenes, these 10 men lived lives that would make even Hollywood's most hardened sinner flinch. They didn't merely chase pleasure, they shattered lives, betrayed friends, and gambled the greatest careers in the world for a fleeting spark in a woman's eyes. The final story on our list will blow your mind. You'll see how a celebrated lord of the stage became a slave to his own desire and lost everything. Smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments whose fall shocked you the most. We're descending into the abyss.
Richard Burton. When a Welsh coal miner welcomed his 12th child into the world, he could hardly have imagined he had given history a man whose voice would be called the music of the spheres, and whose private life would become synonymous with obsession. Richard Burton didn't just love women, he consumed them, as if they were oxygen his powerful whiskey-scorched lungs required to keep working. His arrival in Hollywood marked the end of an era of polished pretty boys. In their place stood a man with an acne-scarred face and the manners of a wild beast locked inside a Savile Row tuxedo. His passion for women mirrored his passion for literature. He wanted every line, every hidden meaning, yet once he finished the book, he rarely left it on the shelf, unless that book was named Elizabeth Taylor. Before meeting her, Burton lived in a state of perpetual pursuit. His biographers lost count trying to record all the actresses, assistants, and passing admirers who drifted through his hotel rooms. He possessed an almost hypnotic power. When Richard began to read Shakespeare in his deep, rumbling baritone, women lost their will. It wasn't technique, it was a force of nature. He would risk everything for a moment's pleasure, often jeopardizing his reputation as a serious stage actor. Colleagues recalled how he could miss a rehearsal at the Old Vic because he had lost his way in the arms of yet another beauty, and no one dared reproach him. His vice was too honest, too unapologetic. But all of this was merely a prelude to the greatest and most destructive romance of the 20th century. The filming of Cleopatra in Rome became the stage for a catastrophe the Vatican condemned as erotic vagrancy. Burton, married at the time to the devoted Sybil Williams, collided with Taylor, and the world ceased to exist. His obsession with Elizabeth defied logic. He was ready to destroy not only his family, but also his career, which already hung by a thread under the crushing weight of the film's monstrous budget. Paparazzi camped outside their villas, and Burton, instead of hiding, hurled his happiness, laced with fury, straight into their faces. He spent fortunes on her that he had yet to earn. His passion was measured in carats. The legendary Krupp diamond, the Peregrina pearl, the unique Taj Mahal necklace, these were not gifts, but attempts to give form to a bottomless devotion. He called her his private hell and his only heaven. Their life became an endless cycle of betrayals, drunken fights, public apologies, and remarriages. Burton endured humiliation, her whims, her illnesses, anything so long as he could breathe in the scent of her skin. He knew this woman was killing the actor in him, turning him into a creature of gossip columns, yet he could not stop. Even when doctors warned that a life soaked in passion and whiskey was dragging him toward the grave, he waved them off. Richard believed that woman was the only justification for a man's existence. In his diaries, filled with ruthless self-examination and pain, woman always stood above art. He would have traded every laurel of Hamlet for a single night of peace in the arms of the one he loved. But peace was denied to him. He chased pleasure with the fury of a man trying to fill a void carved out by a poor Welsh childhood. Every new affair proved to him that he was alive, that he was still the king. His obsession knew no boundaries of decency. He could seduce a friend's wife simply because he sensed a flicker of challenge in her eyes. And yet, within him coexisted a coarse macho and a delicate lyric poet. He wrote letters to women that are now considered masterpieces of the epistolary art, blending vulgarity with something close to the sacred. Richard Burton slipped beyond the control of studio bosses and moral guardians, becoming the first true rebel to openly admit that woman was a drug he had no desire to quit. He died without ever fully breaking free from Taylor, even while married to another. His life became a monument to how great talent can be sacrificed on the altar of beauty. It is the story of a man who had everything, yet wanted only one thing: the unreachable, ever-vanishing spark in a woman's gaze, for which he was willing to burn Rome and his own life to the ground.
Laurence Olivier was a force of nature, then Sir Laurence Olivier was a mechanism of exquisite complexity, where Shakespearean nobility collided every second with baser instincts and an almost pathological need to possess. He was called the Lord of the Stage, yet behind that impeccable title stood a man whose obsession with women took the form of a relentless psychological war. Olivier did not simply seek pleasure, he sought a muse capable of withstanding his perfectionism while becoming his complete reflection. He married 3 times, but it was his union with Vivien Leigh that marked the moment when Britain's greatest actor slipped entirely beyond the bounds of reason and the moral codes of his time. He was prepared to sacrifice everything, to betray his first wife, Jill Esmond, to endure public condemnation, to weave endless lies, all to claim that one girl with the feline face. Their affair began in secrecy, in the fog of London and behind theatre curtains, where Laurence, already an acclaimed master, turned into a fervent young man ready to risk his knighthood for a single night with Vivien. His passion was both intellectual and physical. He saw in a woman not merely an object, but a partner on the grand stage of life, someone he longed to shape in his own image. Yet this was precisely where his obsession began to fracture. Olivier tried to control every breath Vivien took, every role she played, every movement of her soul, never realizing that her worsening bipolar disorder would turn their life into a living hell. He forgave her affairs with Peter Finch, endured her violent outbursts and hours-long hysterics, because the mere thought that this perfect woman might not belong to him was unbearable. His hunger for pleasure often took on a masochistic edge. He revelled in the suffering this love inflicted, channeling it into his performances, where his great heroes carried a rawness no technique could imitate. Olivier was obsessed with superiority, and in women he sought proof of his own exceptionality. When Vivien's beauty and brilliance began to fade, his fixation shifted into a cold search for new blood. He could be ruthless in ways that shocked his friends, tender and devoted one moment, an icy stranger the next, the instant he sensed a woman no longer nourished his ego. Even in later years, married to Joan Plowright, that predatory gleam still flashed in his eyes at the sight of talent and beauty. For him, a woman was the ultimate instrument of understanding life, and in pursuit of that understanding, he spared neither himself nor those around him. He often said that an actor is a creature without skin, and his relationships proved it. He absorbed women's pain, their joy, their secrets, turning them into fuel for his art. Olivier lost all restraint when it came to rivalry. He tolerated no competitors, neither on stage nor in the bedroom. His life unfolded as a series of grand mise-en-scènes, where he always played the leading role, and women were exquisite, yet often doomed scenery. He would lie to the press, bribe photographers, manipulate the feelings of those closest to him, anything to preserve the image of the flawless gentleman, while inside him raged a storm of insecurity and insatiable desire. His obsession was a form of control. He believed that by possessing the most desirable woman in the world, he could possess fate itself. It was a dangerous game, one played on the edge, with his soul as the stake. Until his final days, he wore the mask of dignity, but those who knew him saw a man willing to make any sacrifice, financial, professional, spiritual, for one more moment of that spark that made his heart race and his genius burn brighter. In the end, Laurence Olivier remains not only the great Hamlet, but a man who turned his passion into the longest and most dramatic play in the history of British cinema, a play whose ending was always left open and whose price for pleasure was immeasurable. He proved that even the most disciplined mind is powerless before the call of the flesh and the hunger to possess, forces that carried him through decades of triumphs and personal catastrophes, making his life truly
Peter O'Toole. If chaos had a human face and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see through time and space, that face would be Peter O'Toole, the great Irishman who stormed into British cinema astride a camel as Lawrence of Arabia, never acknowledged limits, neither in art, nor in drink, nor, least of all, in women. His obsession with the fairer sex lacked the cold calculation of Howard Hughes or the tyranny of Rex Harrison. It was raw, untamed passion, the instinct of a man who saw in every woman both a divine revelation and the spark for a magnificent scandal. O'Toole lived as though the world were a set for an endless adventure film, where love was always the ultimate prize. His attraction to women resembled religious ecstasy. He was capable of the most reckless acts, the kind only a man without a sense of self-preservation would dare. Peter could abandon an important shoot in the desert or in London just to fly across the globe for a woman whose name he barely knew, but whose image had lodged in his mind like a splinter. He didn't merely seek pleasure, he demanded an intensity from life that only women and dangerous amounts of alcohol could provide. His marriage to Sion Phillips became a legend of the British stage, a union of two titans where tenderness gave way to flying plates and public confrontations. O'Toole was obsessed with Sion, yet that obsession never stopped him from seeking solace in the arms of countless others. He possessed a magnetism that was impossible to resist, a fragile aristocratic grace fused with a raw masculine force that made him a danger to any woman's heart. He would spend his last money on armfuls of roses for a stranger, or buy first-class tickets for a waitress who had smiled at him in a bar. Social hierarchies meant nothing to him. His collection ranged from princesses and Hollywood divas to ordinary girls from pubs, and he met each of them with the same fierce, almost unsettling delight. Friends recalled that O'Toole lived in a constant state of love-struck trance. He could recite poetry for hours to a woman he had met only minutes earlier, and she would believe every word, because in that moment he truly was ready to give his life for her. His lack of control was absolute. Studio bosses despaired when Peter vanished for days with yet another lover, leaving multi-million-dollar productions frozen in place. He feared neither lawsuits, nor fines, nor oblivion. His only dread was boredom and the absence of a woman's warmth. There was always an edge of danger to his obsession. He was drawn to the line where madness begins. He might start a fight in a private club defending the honor of a woman who needed no defense, or steal a car just to make it to a dawn rendezvous. There were no half measures in his life. Women were not merely physical pleasure, they were his way of anchoring himself to a reality that often seemed too dull and predictable. Even as age caught up with him, and a body worn down by decades of excess began to fail, the spark in his eyes at the sight of a beautiful woman never dimmed. He remained a rake of the old school, one who valued not quantity, but the intensity of the moment, the brilliance of a spark that leaves a lasting burn on the soul. His obsession was a form of poetry. He saw in women muses who justified his own vices and weaknesses. Peter O'Toole was willing to wager everything, his career, his money, his health, even his sanity, for the chance to be loved and to love in return with the ferocity of an Irish king. He carried that hunger through his entire life, remaining to the very end a man whose freedom was inseparable from a woman's laughter and the lingering scent of perfume after a wild night. He proved to the world that one can break free of any control when passion is the only master, and the only goal is that eternal, elusive, and beautiful feminine essence for which he was ready to burn every bridge behind him and begin again on the ashes of his own life. His story is a hymn to recklessness, each chapter written in lipstick across hotel mirrors and sealed with the mark of absolute, sincere, and utterly uncontrollable obsession.
Christopher Lee. Long before he became the embodiment of cinematic evil and the definitive Dracula of world cinema, Christopher Lee was a young intelligence officer with a lineage tracing back to Charlemagne and appetites that could unsettle even London's most seasoned libertines. His image, a tall, somber aristocrat with an icy gaze and a thunderous bass voice, was the perfect snare for women, and Lee wielded it with surgical precision. Unlike his contemporaries who flaunted their exploits, Christopher turned his obsession with women into something resembling a covert operation. His passion was discreet, almost gothic. He avoided noisy parties, favoring the intimacy of private clubs and secluded estates, where his presence created an aura of dangerous mystery. Lee was driven by conquest. Each new woman was a fortress to be taken, not by siege, but by the sudden assault of charm. His personal life in the 1950s resembled a labyrinth of secret meetings and coded notes. He undertook risky adventures, crossing borders for a single encounter with a high society lady whose status made their affair forbidden. That taste for the forbidden was the engine of his nature. Lee possessed the rare gift of making a woman feel like the sole keeper of some dark secret he only pretended to guard. His obsession had the quality of collecting emotions. Admiration, fear, devotion, he absorbed them like a true screen vampire, feeding his inner certainty. Before meeting his wife, Birgit, he lived what might now be called a survival hunt. He would spend his last money on impeccable suits and rare fragrances to maintain the image of the perfect lover, even if it left him without a penny for dinner. Lee understood that his appearance was a commodity, and he sold it at the highest possible price, the peace of mind and emotional balance of the women who fell under his spell. His control faltered only in the face of rejection, rare but deeply wounding. In those moments, aristocratic composure gave way to cold fury, and he plunged into new affairs with doubled intensity, determined to prove his invincibility. He did not shy away from lies or manipulation, weaving myths about his wartime exploits to heighten his romantic mystique. For Lee, a woman was not merely a companion, but a mirror in which he sought to see his own grandeur. His attraction to young actresses on Hammer studio sets often placed producers in awkward positions. Christopher could be disarmingly persistent, using his authority and overwhelming presence to press his advantage. He believed pleasure was a privilege reserved for the chosen, and with his royal blood he considered himself fully entitled to it. His passion was dark, steeped in the smoke of fine cigarettes and the scent of aged cognac. He could speak for hours about classical music or the occult, hypnotizing his listener until she found herself entirely within his grasp. Even after becoming a devoted family man, Lee retained that predatory glint, the mark of someone who understood every nuance of feminine vulnerability. His obsession was a form of power. He sought not only to possess the body, but to command the mind, to become an inescapable fixation. He spared no expense or risk to preserve the image of the flawless and dangerous seducer. In studio corridors, whispers claimed that the list of his conquests was longer than his list of roles, and each remembered him as the strangest and most magnetic man they had ever known. Christopher Lee stepped beyond the moral boundaries of his circle, turning his life into an endless performance in which a woman was both audience and accomplice to his hidden passions. His story is the chronicle of a man who transformed his inner darkness into the glow of spotlights and his obsession into a weapon of exquisite seduction, merciless and without limit. He proved that a gentleman can be a monster, and a monster the most desired lover if he possesses patience, lineage, and a voice that sounds like a sentence passed. Lee lived entirely on his own terms, making pleasure part of his legend, and even in old age he remained that same dark prince for whose fleeting attention women were willing to forget decorum and duty. It was an obsession of the highest order, cold, calculated, and utterly irresistible, like death itself, which he so often portrayed on screen, yet from which he so skillfully escaped into the arms of yet another beauty. His path stands as proof that true passion needs no proclamation. A whisper is enough to send a shiver down the spine, and the resolve to go to the very end in pursuit of that singular pleasure, the power over another human heart.
David Niven. David Niven was the living embodiment of the English gentleman Hollywood loved to paint in its most rose-tinted dreams: a neat mustache, an impeccable parting, a sly, ironic squint, and manners refined enough to make even a queen feel like a commoner. Yet behind this dazzling facade, scented with fine tobacco and freshly pressed linen, lived a man whose obsession with women was as fundamental as his British accent. Niven didn't merely love women, he existed within their gravitational pull, convinced that life without romantic intrigue was nothing more than a dull rehearsal for death. His appetite for pleasure lacked the heavy torment of Richard Burton or the dark mystique of Christopher Lee. It was light, effervescent as champagne, yet utterly uncontrollable, the passion of a gentleman rogue. Niven possessed a rare gift. He could seduce without leaving scars, turning every affair into a thrilling adventure for which his lovers would remain grateful long after it ended. But this lightness was only the tip of the iceberg. Deep within him lived an insatiable need for female affirmation, perhaps born from a profound personal tragedy, the loss of his first wife, Primula, in a senseless accident. After her death, Niven seemed to come undone, slipping beyond the bounds of all propriety. He launched himself into an endless marathon of seduction that spanned both sides of the Atlantic. His obsession took on the character of an aesthetic quest. He sought in women not merely physical closeness, but that elusive spark that made him feel truly alive. He would do anything for the pleasure of seeing admiration in a beautiful woman's eyes. Niven could spend an entire film salary on jewelry for a woman he intended to see for just a weekend, or charter a plane to deliver fresh flowers from London to Paris in time for breakfast with a new muse. His list of conquests read like a registry of the Golden Age's brightest stars, from Grace Kelly to Rita Hayworth, from Vogue models to the daughters of magnates. Niven had an extraordinary ability to sustain multiple affairs at once, while each woman remained sincerely convinced she was the only one. It was a high-wire act requiring nerves of steel and absolute faith in his own irresistible charm. His obsession was methodical. He kept private notebooks where he recorded the habits and preferences of his lovers, ensuring that every encounter unfolded like a perfectly directed play. He risked exposure, slipping into bedrooms under the watchful eyes of paparazzi, yet always emerged unscathed thanks to his disarming charisma. Studio bosses tried to rein him in, fearing for the image of the noble hero,
but Niven only laughed it off, insisting that a gentleman must remain occupied, otherwise he becomes furniture. His pursuit of pleasure was his protest against the dullness of existence. He wasn't simply seeking sex, he sought conversation, wit, and brilliance, qualities he believed only certain women could provide. At the same time, he remained almost pathologically generous. He helped former lovers secure roles, paid their bills, and stayed their loyal confidant. His obsession, paradoxically, nourished his career. Each new romance ignited a spark he carried onto the screen, making his characters vibrantly alive and irresistibly charming. Niven was ready for any escapade. He might vanish from a film set mid-production if a woman promising an unforgettable evening appeared on the horizon. For him, the word no simply did not exist when it came to female beauty. He stepped beyond the control of social norms, openly declaring that monogamy was an invention of those lacking imagination. Even his second marriage to Hiordis Tersmaiden, marked by pain and mutual infidelity, failed to halt his endless pursuit. He continued the chase well into old age, preserving his elegance and wit for a single purpose: to be admired. David Niven proved that a man could be the most courteous presence in any room and, at the same time, its most unapologetic sinner, so long as his sins were seasoned with genuine admiration and impeccable style. His life became a hymn to hedonism, where woman was the central deity and pleasure the only religion. He risked his gentlemanly reputation for questionable entanglements, yet it was precisely those entanglements that made him unforgettable. It was the obsession of a man who understood that true luxury lies not in money or fame, but in the chance to peer each evening into a new mirror of a woman's soul and find reflected there his own undimmed charm. Niven lived his life like an endless parachute jump, thrilling, perilous, and always with a smile, knowing that at the bottom there would be soft arms waiting to catch him, ready to share in his endless descent into the abyss of pleasure. His story is a reminder that behind even the most restrained British facade may beat a heart driven by a constant, all-consuming, and utterly uncontrollable hunger for love and admiration, a hunger for which he was ready to turn the world upside down, or at the very least make it a far more delightful and dangerously decadent place.
Michael Caine. When the film Alfie hit the screens in the mid-60s, British cinema changed forever, acquiring a new face, the face of Michael Caine. Few realized that for Caine, the role was not an acting challenge so much as a near-documentary reflection of his own life at the time. A young man from London's working-class districts with a sharp Cockney accent and horn-rimmed glasses that lent his gaze both intelligence and a predatory edge, Michael Caine became the ultimate hunter of swinging London. His obsession with women was a form of social revenge. The son of a porter and a charwoman broke free from class constraints, winning over those who would once have passed him by without a glance. Caine did not simply love women, he was intoxicated by them, turning his life into an endless procession of dates, Chelsea club parties, and neon-lit drives through the capital's restless nights. His passion lacked the aristocratic polish of David Niven. It carried the raw energy of the streets, a hunger to take everything life offered, and to take it now. Michael would do anything for fleeting pleasure, spend his last money renting a luxury car to impress a model, or throw himself into a dubious adventure just to find himself among the most desirable women of his time. His obsession had the quality of insatiable curiosity. He collected types, personalities, accents, drawing from each new encounter material for his future roles. While studio publicists tried to mold him into a serious dramatic actor, Michael openly reveled in his status as Britain's most eligible bachelor. He slipped beyond the control of producers, ignoring advice to settle down, changing partners at a pace that stirred envy even among his most liberated peers. Caine possessed a rare gift. He was the kind of man who made any woman feel safe, until she realized she was only another chapter in his endless book of adventures. His passion was methodical and chaotic at once. He could begin a romance on set that lasted exactly as long as the cameras rolled, then shift instantly to a new pursuit the moment the lights went out. The most vivid illustration of his obsession came when he saw Shakira Baksh in a television coffee commercial. It was no passing attraction, it was a spark that made Michael Caine lose his head entirely. He was ready to mobilize the entire advertising world, to use every contact in London's artistic and underworld circles just to find her. His search resembled a detective story, with his sanity as the stake. When he finally found her and secured a meeting, his friends were astonished. The man who had preached freedom from attachment for years became a devoted knight, his obsession now focused on a single point. Yet before that moment, Caine lived 10 lifetimes filled with women's names and the lingering scent of other women's perfumes. He was willing to risk exposure, scandal, headlines that could have shattered his image, because he believed that an actor without the experience of true passion was nothing but an empty shell. His appetite for pleasure was his fuel. He admitted that in his youth he could not fall asleep unless he knew a new encounter awaited him the next day. Michael Caine broke free from the confines of public morality, openly declaring that a man had the right to seek his ideal through endless trial and error. His London flat became a headquarters of hedonism, where champagne flowed freely and women's laughter lasted until dawn. Caine sacrificed sleep and health to nights in clubs like Ad Lib, where reality and cinema blurred in cigarette smoke and music that never seemed to end. Caine understood that his time was now, and he squeezed everything he could from that now. His obsession was honest. He never promised what he could not give, yet what he did offer, his undivided attention and extraordinary charisma, made him the most desired man of his era. Even after becoming a global star, he retained that hunger for life, seeing in every woman a mystery worth unraveling. His story is the journey of a man who used obsession as a battering ram to break through class barriers and prove that true passion knows no limits. Michael Caine lived his golden years as a great escapist, fleeing the dullness of ordinary life into the embrace of beauty, every step driven by a willingness to give everything for a single moment of genuine pleasure. He remains a man who tamed his obsession and turned it into the foundation of his unmistakable style, a blend of Cockney charm and Hollywood sheen that still commands admiration. It is the chronicle of a loss of control transformed into a triumph of will and desire, where every woman in Caine's life was not merely an episode, but an essential piece in the mosaic of his vast and turbulent life, rich with pleasures for which he was willing to risk everything.
Rex Harrison. Rex Harrison, immortalized in cinema as the impeccable and razor-tongued Professor Henry Higgins, possessed in real life a character so complex and domineering that his nickname Sexy Rexy sounded more like a warning than a compliment. His obsession with women carried none of the romance or reckless charm of others. It was cold, almost clinical, a craving for absolute control that turned every relationship into an act of psychological conquest. Harrison did not simply seek pleasure, he demanded that a woman become his extension, his shadow, his most devoted audience, ready to applaud even at his worst. The slightest hint of independence in a partner could send his obsession spiraling beyond restraint. Married 6 times, each union was another attempt to create the perfect Galatea, a woman he could mold to his liking, only to discard her without mercy once the illusion began to crack. Rex would go to any lengths to satisfy his ego.
With aristocratic charm, he lured women into the orbit of his attention, only to overwhelm him with his sharp sarcasm and relentless expectations. His private life resembled a battlefield strewn with broken hearts and shattered careers. The darkest and most shocking chapter of his life was his involvement with actress Carol Landis. Harrison was consumed by her, but when passion collided with his unwillingness to sacrifice comfort and status for divorce, his detachment bordered on cruelty. Her tragic death, which unfolded almost before his eyes, became the ultimate symbol of his moral unraveling. He sought to control the narrative, bending facts and shielding himself, and ultimately walked away untouched, leaving behind only whispers and scandal. His hunger for pleasure was inseparable from a deep, pathological self-centeredness. He spent lavishly to impress new lovers, but beneath the glitter was a man who did not know how to give, only to take. His obsession revealed itself in how he reshaped his wives. Lily Palmer, Kay Kendall, Elizabeth Harris, each was expected to conform to his exacting standards in everything, from appearance to opinions. Rex Harrison was willing to endure financial losses and legal battles so long as he emerged victorious in each divorce, free to plunge immediately into new entanglements. To him, a woman was an essential ornament of his greatness. Without her, his existence felt diminished. Colleagues recalled that on set he could be unbearable if he sensed his masculinity questioned or if his leading lady failed to show him proper admiration. He slipped beyond the control of studio bosses, dictating terms and choosing partners based on their willingness to bend to his will. His pursuit of pleasure was driven by a fear of loneliness and obscurity. He needed desperately to be the center of at least one woman's universe, and when that center shifted, he would tear everything apart to restore it. Even his seemingly noble act, marrying Kay Kendall as she battled leukemia, is often viewed through the lens of his obsession with drama. He wanted to play the role of the tragic hero, and he played it flawlessly, even as behind the scenes he continued to seek new consolations. Rex Harrison turned his life into an endless auction of female devotion, where the stakes kept rising and the price of pleasure was measured in human cost. His obsession was a form of tyranny disguised as old-world elegance. He was willing to risk public rejection if it meant conquering yet another heart, but fate favored him. His talent allowed him to be forgiven for what others never would have escaped. He lived with an unshakable belief in his right to every whim, and the women in his life became steps leading to his personal pedestal. It was a chronicle of empathy lost, where the place of a heart was taken by a perfectly calibrated metronome, ticking away the moments of his private satisfaction. Harrison proved that a gentleman could be a destroyer without ever losing the crease in his trousers or the perfection of his parting, and that was the most unsettling and magnetic part of his legend. Until his final days, he remained faithful to his obsession, convinced the world owed him its finest offerings, including the women he used as fuel for his unrelenting vanity, leaving behind a legacy of brilliance, cynicism, and the bitter aftertaste of an unquenched desire. Sean Connery. When Dr. No premiered in 1962, the world encountered not just an actor, but a new form of masculine aggression wrapped in a flawless tuxedo. Sean Connery, a former coffin polisher, bodybuilder and truck driver from Edinburgh, brought to James Bond something Ian Fleming's pages had never fully captured, a raw, almost unsettling sexual confidence. His obsession with women lacked the playfulness of Niven or the theatricality of Olivier. It was direct, like a gunshot, a predator's instinctive pull towards its prey. This break from the restraints of civilized behavior became his unmistakable signature. Connery did not simply play Bond, he lived with the rhythm of a man accustomed to taking whatever he desired without asking permission. His passion was physical and commanding. He possessed a kind of masculinity that made women on set forget their lines the moment he entered the room. Unlike the fictional Agent 007, whose affairs were scripted, the real Sean Connery often left producers baffled with the unpredictability of his personal life. His first marriage to Diane Cilento became a prolonged chronicle of conflict, driven by his near-pathological inability to remain faithful. For Connery, a woman was not merely a partner, but proof of his power over a world he had once entered as a penniless boy. His obsession revealed itself in how easily he risked the carefully constructed image of a family man, sacrificing it for brief yet volcanic affairs. He did not shy away from open confrontations with the press, smashing paparazzi cameras when they tried to capture him with yet another companion, yet he never concealed his appetite for life. His pursuit of pleasure carried no false shame. He believed a man of his stature was entitled to indulgence in all its forms. Behind the scenes of every Bond film unfolded dramas worthy of their own novels. Sean was driven by conquest. He was drawn to women who challenged him, but once the fortress fell, his interest could fade as quickly as it had ignited. He slipped beyond the bounds of commitment whenever a new muse appeared, one capable of igniting his fierce Scottish temperament. His obsession was brutally honest. He never promised eternal love, but he gave women the intoxicating sense of standing beside a force of nature. Connery was willing to spend vast sums to surround himself with luxury that attracted the most desirable women of the era, from models to aristocrats. His passion for golf often served as a convenient pretext for exclusive gatherings where pleasure was elevated to ritual. Even as he attempted to distance himself from the Bond image, his personal life remained just as dynamic and scandalous. He accepted financial risks and legal battles to preserve his autonomy in matters of desire. There was a weight to his manner of seduction, the imprint of a man shaped by physical labour and struggle. He had no patience for half measures. He took what he believed strength entitled him to. Many contemporaries recalled that Sean could be irresistibly charming, yet there was always a cold fire in his eyes, the unmistakable gaze of a hunter without mercy. His obsession with women was also a way of confronting an inner void and lingering insecurity born from a poor childhood. Each conquest became another brick in the fortress of his personal myth. Connery stepped beyond the control of public opinion, allowing himself words and actions that would shatter a career today. Yet in his era, his blunt authenticity only added to his legend. He was willing to risk everything for the simple, vital sensation of feeling alive, and women were his primary source of that energy. Even after meeting his second wife, Micheline Roquebrune, who managed to channel his passion into calmer waters, he never lost that dangerous gleam in his eyes, the one that held millions of women spellbound across the world. Sean Connery lived as a man who wrote his own rules, and within those rules women held a central, almost sacred place, objects of both reverence and conquest. His story is the path of a warrior who found in feminine beauty both his refuge and his battlefield. He proved that true charisma does not depend on refinement when it is backed by an unshakable willingness to pursue desire to the very end, no matter the cost. It was an obsession that became legend, the chronicle of a man whose loss of control transformed into the highest expression of freedom, reserved only for kings of the screen and those who truly command their own fate. His legacy is not only his roles, but a way of life in which pleasure was not a reward, but the only possible state of a soul hungry for recognition and warmth in the cold glare of fame.
Oliver Reed. If British cinema ever knew a man who lived as though every breath were an act of open defiance against death itself, that man was Oliver Reed. His obsession with women was not the refined game of an aristocrat or the calculated pursuit of a careerist. It was a raging primal force, inseparable from his legendary drinking and his total contempt for social norms. With his heavy jaw, the gaze of a hunted wolf, and the build of a dock worker, Reed slipped out of control at every opportunity, turning seduction into a loud, dangerous, and utterly unforgettable performance. For him, a woman was not merely an object of pleasure, but a partner in his endless escape from boredom and routine. Oliver was ready for anything. He might storm into an elite restaurant on horseback to impress a lover, or start a mass brawl defending the honor of a woman he had met only minutes before. His passion was both destructive and creative. He spent staggering sums on wild drinking sprees, surrounded by beautiful women, believing money only had value when it dissolved into clinking glasses and laughter. His defiance of studio discipline became legendary. Producers trembled when Reed walked into the office, knowing full well that contracts meant nothing to him if a night of chaos with a new lover was at stake. His obsession carried the thrill of addiction. He sought in women the same sharp edge he found in dangerous stunts or street fights. His private life was pure chaos, broken marriages, countless affairs, fleeting encounters, each one a blazing flash against the backdrop of his self-destructive existence. He was willing to risk total obscurity and ruin rather than betray his nature. Oliver Reed possessed a raw, animal magnetism that drew in women weary of polished gentlemen. He was real, dangerous, alive. His relationships, whether with Jacqueline Darrell or in his long union with the much younger Josephine Burroughs, were steeped in scandal, yet carried a sincerity that could never be staged. His obsession revealed itself in his boundless generosity. He might gift a necklace to a stranger simply because he liked her laugh, and forget it entirely by morning. He lived by the rule of all or nothing, and the women in his life received that everything in full measure, his fury, his tenderness, his madness. He broke free from the moral boundaries of his time, openly declaring that pleasure was the only goal worth pursuing in human existence. His fixation on women became a shield against the loneliness he drowned in gallons of alcohol. Friends remembered that behind the mask of the brawler and womanizer was a deeply vulnerable man who feared silence above all else. Women gave him the noise he needed to feel safe. He was ready for any adventure, to swim the English Channel for a rendezvous or commandeer a yacht for a party in the middle of the ocean. Oliver Reed did not recognize the word no when it came to his desires. His passion was rough, smelling of sweat, tobacco, and expensive cologne, and it was utterly honest. He never pretended to be anything he wasn't, and women valued that wild sincerity more than the flawless manners of his peers. Even on set, his obsession could override everything. He might halt an entire production if his current affair demanded immediate attention. Authority meant nothing to him. He was the king of his own decadent and dangerous world, where women were both his greatest muses and his inevitable casualties. Oliver Reed lived his life as a prolonged battle for the right to be himself, and in that battle, pleasure was his greatest prize. He died as he had lived, in a bar, among people, after another argument, still chasing the same intoxicating high that only women and risk could give him. His story is a chronicle of absolute freedom, forged in passion and self-indulgence, a man who turned his obsession into a legend, both terrifying and mesmerizing. He proved that any control can be broken when fire runs through your veins and your heart is driven by an endless hunger to possess what can never truly be held, a fleeting moment of pure, unfiltered pleasure in the embrace of beauty. It was a life lived at the very edge, where every woman became a chapter in the epic poem of his rebellion against reality, and every conquest a bittersweet triumph over the dullness of human fate.
Reed remains in history as one of the last great madmen, a man whose path to pleasure ran through the ashes of rules and the wreckage of convention, leaving behind only the scent of danger and the eternal echo of his thunderous laughter.
Albert Finney. Albert Finney was that rare kind of British actor who possessed the force of Richard Burton and the refinement of Laurence Olivier, yet refused outright to play by the rules of Hollywood's Vanity Fair. His obsession with women took the form of a deep, almost sacred search for authenticity in a world that increasingly resembled painted scenery. The son of a bookmaker, Finney brought to both screen and life the raw truth of the angry young men, but beneath his grounded exterior lived a refined aesthete and an insatiable lover. His loss of control revealed itself in a quiet but unwavering refusal to meet expectations. He could turn down Laurence of Arabia, a role that might have made him the richest man in the world, simply because he was consumed by a new woman or seized by the urge to travel in the company of yet another muse. Finney did not collect names, he collected states of being. His passion was subdued, yet all-consuming. He earned a reputation as an intellectual seducer, a man who conquered not through glitter, but through a disarming honesty no woman could resist. His conquests included the most unattainable icons of the era, among them Anouk Aimée, who became his second wife, and Audrey Hepburn, whose legendary reserve he managed to break during the filming of Two for the Road. His affair with Hepburn was the purest expression of his obsession. Finney was ready to shatter not only another man's marriage, but his own standing as a serious actor, becoming instead a fervent young man who saw in Audrey not a style icon, but a living, vulnerable soul. He was willing to risk everything for the simple pleasure of being himself beside someone who understood him. Albert could disappear for months at a time, vanishing to remote villas or small Parisian cafes, ignoring agents' calls and producers' furious telegrams. His obsession moved beyond social hierarchies. He pursued leading ladies and unknown women with equal intensity, meeting them during his endless wanderings across the world. For him, there was no such thing as star status. Every woman was a mystery to be explored through intimacy and conversation. His appetite for pleasure was not driven by greed, but by a thirst for understanding. Finney accepted any financial cost, paying vast divorce settlements just to preserve the freedom for his next obsession. He believed that an actor without genuine experience of passion was merely an imitation of a man, and he lived each relationship as a deep immersion into another reality. Friends recalled that Albert had a rare gift for listening. He made a woman feel like the center of the universe without resorting to cheap tricks or grand speeches. Yet beneath that gentleness lived a man who could not endure confinement. The moment obsession began to harden into routine, Finney would leave not bitterness behind him, but a quiet melancholy, like the memory of a lost paradise. He moved beyond the control of a system that demanded predictability. His passion for life was inseparable from the feminine presence. He believed it was women who kept the world from collapsing into chaos. Even in later years, when he became an established master and recipient of countless honors, his eyes still lit with that same fierce and tender fire at the sight of beauty. Finney was willing to risk his reputation, choosing questionable projects simply because they brought him closer to the object of his fascination. His life lacked the scandalous notoriety of Oliver Reed, yet it was filled with quiet revolutions in the hearts of those who loved him. He was a master of nuance and understatement, which made his obsession all the more dangerous and all the more irresistible. Albert Finney lived as a man who knew the price of pleasure and was willing to pay it in full, without bargaining.
He proved that one could be a kin of Hollywood without truly living in it, and a great lover without turning romance into spectacle. His story is the final chord of an era when British actors of the old school broke free from control to show the world that true passion does not seek publicity, it demands only the courage to go to the very end in pursuit of that singular moment when two souls merge and time ceases to exist. He remains remembered as the last independent, a man whose path to pleasure was built on honesty with himself and an endless fascination with woman, who to him was always the greatest mystery of existence. Finney departed, leaving behind a trail of great performances and even greater love stories, each lived with a fullness and intensity reserved for those truly possessed by life in all its forms. It was the finale of a grand saga about 10 men who chose pleasure over peace and passion over career, forever reshaping the face of world cinema and our understanding of what it means to be truly alive.